The following pages were written by me, Catherine Oelrich, Seaman, born January 23, 1907 on the Cold Spring Ranch. Recollections of Cold Spring Ranch. I'm going to tell of our early days living in the Cold Spring Ranch, owned and operated by Albert Frederick Oelrich, situated 8 miles from the village of Princeton in the beautiful hills of British Columbia. Dad arrived and bought the ranch from Bill Allison in 1892. Our home ranch was bordered on the east by Elephant Mountain, north by Storm King Mountain, so named by us because we could always see a storm coming from the north long before it reached us. The West Mountain was and still is well timbered with pine and fir trees, and in Hoover Creek cedar trees. The upper hills were very steep, so we didn't go much up that way. Us youngsters used to herd pigs at first and later on sheep on the east slopes, all over the top of Elephant Mountain and back north and on the slopes facing west where grass and flowers grew rich and tall. We had anywhere up to 30 pigs to herd, big and small, and there was great digging for the pigs. This was about the year 1912. By 1914, Dad had gone out of pigs, bought 25 head of ewes and 1 ram, and from herding pigs we had to go herding sheep. All this before there was a school out our way. I remember the year I was 5 years old. My brother John drove us into town to school through April, May, and June. I was 5 years old in January. There were 5 of us, John, Caroline, Gertrude, and Grace, who were twins, and Catherine, me. We had to rise before daylight for breakfast and then drive a horse and buggy 8 miles into Princeton School, which consisted of 2 rooms, one for the little ones in the lower grades, the big boys and girls in the other one. The playground was divided, girls here, boys there. The old grey mare we drove never wanted to go beyond a walk, was also balky. The ranch kept us well fed, as we always had a very large garden and a large potato patch. Dad used to sell vegetables to buy flour and sugar and clothes for us. He sold turnips and potatoes by the ton. I remember him saying in spring, "I wish I hadn't sold all the spuds last fall. I could get twice as much now." He also sold hay, which he hauled to Headley with his team on sleighs in winter and would stay overnight. I well remember the tall haystacks he would build in summer. Also had a large strawberry patch and sold strawberries by the crate. They were usually ripe at haying time. Once he sent us to pick berries while he finished off a large stack. The hay let go and the top slid off. So he hollered over, "Don't pick any more berries. I won't have time to go into town before we rebuild this so-and-so stack." So we used the strawberries and made jam and preserves. The next picking was taken into town. I don't remember how many crates. I know there were always several. He would deliver them to his regular customers. We used to milk the cows, separate the milk, churn butter, and feed the milk back to the calves. He had chickens and turkeys, sold eggs, and had regular customers who bought turkeys every year. We picked them all, and a few of the customers wanted them drawn. We kept a few pigs and sold wiener pigs in the summer. One time, as told by my sister Gert, Dad started to town driving a 1-horse buggy hitched to a flighty mare we owned. He always said she would run away at the drop of a hat. This time she dumped him and his 20 dozen eggs upside down, kicked herself free of the 4-wheeled buggy, crossed the Hoover Bridge, and came home through the fields at top speed. Soon Dad came walking home covered with eggs and from head to foot. He repaired the broken shaft and hitched the same mare, Tilly, to the buggy and drove with her to town with what he could salvage of his load added to the day's pick of eggs. It was necessary to drive to town for supplies for the house and grain for horses and chicken feed. Another one runaway experience, as told by Gertie, started at the top of the grade when the horse fell and slid, ending up where Cook's and Pearlie Russell's store used to be. Mother and Dad were badly injured with some broken bones and bruises all over their bodies. One wintry day, Dad was feeding the stock and I was helping to push the hay in to the mangers inside the cow barn. When Dad opened the drop door to fill the manger, he accidentally dropped it, making a loud bang. This frightened the team and they took off in high gear. Dad went flying and landed in a snowbank. The horses went both sides of an old fir stump which pulled the kingpin, leaving the team to run with Doubletree bounding behind them. They went through the sheep yard, down past the house and through the field, making a large circle and arriving all out of wind back at the stable door. So we took them back to the load of hay, found the kingpin in the snow. This one holds the Doubletree on the tongue of the sleigh. Hitched them back and carried on with the feeding. I purposely do not mention what was said by Dad, as it was not fit for publication. He usually would whip his horses after an escapade and tell them in no uncertain terms what he thought. He always planted wheat and oats so he wouldn't need to buy all the feed he used.
Okay.
He always planted wheat and oats so he wouldn't need to buy all the feed he used. My first memories were of a lot of willows and cottonwood trees which gradually disappeared as I got older. I was soon out with the older ones, helping to pile brush onto a pile which was left to dry and then burned when the weather was suitable, either late fall or early spring. The whole ranch was cleared by Dad. For help he had sometimes an old prospector who wanted a job for a grub stake and would spend Saturday and Sunday in the hills looking for whatever prospectors looked for. These men would bring lots of rock samples, but none ever amounted to anything. We used to get a lot of little trout from the creek, too, which were very delicious. I well remember the first time I ever fished. Dad was gone fishing when someone, who it was I don't remember, came to see him on business. There was no one else to send, so Mother sent me to fetch him. I think I was about 7 or 8 years old. When I found Dad, there were the usual choice expressions. Then he handed me his rod and said, "Here, you go ahead and fish. I'll be right back." He never did get back, and I stayed fishing until I was called for supper. I don't remember how many fish I had, or if I could even count, but there was sure a nice lot. I don't even remember cleaning them. They always used to say, "He's a poor sportsman who can't take care of his own game." I must have been pretty young. It seems to me I've been preparing fish all my life. Dad must have put up a lot of hay at one time. I well remember his talking of tons, and there would be 2 tall stacks the full length of the stackyard and a short one in between them. Any barns he had would have the loft packed full, and the old log hay barn was always filled with choice oat hay for the horses in the stable. We always had 2 teams or more and several saddle horses. Some of the horses were used for both driving and riding. I first remember a log fence which was between the fields and the roadway on up the valley. The road was mostly 2-wheel tracks. The road Dad and his brother built turned up the hill at our place, wandered through the trees, and came down into the valley where the Summers Creek Road turns off the highway now. They used mostly pick and shovel. I guess they had a horse to move any logs or trees they felled. At one time we had a hand-operated churn which consisted of a crock with a hole through the lid where the handle of a plunger came through. It was filled about half full of cream, and the plunger worked up and down until the butter separated from the buttermilk. We got the buttermilk to drink, and we would take turns to churn. I also remember us meeting Dad at the door with a tin cup, it was enamel, to get our drinks, of warm milk right from the source. By the time I was 7 years old, I was milking cows too. I guess that's how we all grew up, because I just went along and joined in with the older ones. It seems we just naturally did what had to be done. There never seemed to be a training period or lessons to do these things. All this time Dad was trying to get a school started. He didn't want his kids to grow up illiterate. Finally, there were enough of us with others living out there to make up the number to open a school. I think it was 16 or 18 children. The first teacher we had was Mrs. Graham, who was also teaching her youngest daughter, Mabel. That was the year I was 11 years old, and there were 6 of us Oelriches: Caroline, Gertrude, Grace, Catherine, me, Irene, and Albert Jr. We walked most of the time. It was a little over 2 miles. At first the school was in a 2-room dwelling house. Our teacher lived in the back, and the front was our schoolroom.
Okay.
As we grew older, we rode the hills and the open range, fenced now and belongs to Wayne Sellers. We rode to find our saddle horses and to find cows with new calves. In the fall, 2 of us riding together would bring in the cows for the winter, our big roundup. We would sometimes spend weeks looking for one or more that had strayed away. Our horses always ranged on Elephant Mountain. We had names for lots of places. The crossing places on Oelrich Creek we called Upper, Middle, and Lower Crossing. The Yellow Slope, so named because in spring it was covered with masses of wild sunflowers. There were little swamps too: Maud Swamp, Upper and Lower Swamp, the Long Slope, Gus Ferdin's, Hans Luff's, and Otto Johnson's. Way back north is Sellers Mountain. We enjoyed the rides and often walked out hunting horses, would catch our pet and ride home bareback. They would be very fat and sleek after a very short while on grass. When we had sheep, we took turn about herding. Gertie and Grace and I would each miss school every 3rd day to herd sheep. Our teacher didn't like it, as she said we missed so much we would never pass the exams. We seemed to make it, though. At 17, I was in the 4th reader, grade 8. not clever or smart, but still being 11 years old when we started, and Carrie and Gert and Grace were older than I was. Our teacher put us through the first and second primers, first and second readers, a bit slower through the third reader. Then the fourth reader we went through normally. It wasn't hard, but there was more of it. We all enjoyed school. We had games of tag, can-over, cross tag and baseball, played with a homemade ball our older brother John had covered with blue denim. We played hide and seek, and this was the rhyme we shouted so all could hear. Everybody knows 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40. Ready or not, here I come. Whether you're hiding around the goal or not, you'll be caught, dead or alive. These were the good old days for us, as there was never a dull moment. Someone was always getting into a scrape of one kind or another. Once Dad was out stooking hay, chalking, in a far field, and he wanted to finish before he left. So it got dark before he got home, and when he came in he was soaking wet, up to his belt line. Naturally everyone wanted to know what had happened. Oh, I walked through that so-and-so second little spring. I thought I went around it, but I walked right through the middle of it. He cut a lot of hay with a scythe before the land was cleared. When we were very young, we had our chores to do. One was weeding the garden, and I never knew for years and years that the weeds grew all over the garden. When we had to weed, there were weeds just in the rows. Finally, Mom told us Dad used to rise at daylight and go over the garden between the rows with a wheel hoe. The cedar part was removed and L-shaped holes were fastened to the wheels. This did a very good job of weeding between the rows. I think all of the residents along the creeks, Allison Creek and 1 Mile Creek, used to trap furs in winter. There were muskrats, mink, weasels, beaver, a few marten, and plenty of wild rabbits. One could go out in the afternoon with a .22 and shoot enough to feed any number of people you wanted to. All those cleared acres you see now, while driving to Merritt, were once covered with thick willows, cottonwoods, alders, and pine trees. Our ranch was named Cold Spring Ranch because of the springs in the meadows near the creek, of which there were 9 at one time. Dad filled or tried to fill 2 of them with rocks by picking rocks off the fields. We helped at this job. He hauled the rocks on a go-devil or sled, low flat homemade runners shaped in front with plank surface and 2x4s on each side to haul heavy loads, such as sacks of grain to where we wanted to plant it, rocks off the field, etc. We used to haul garden produce on it too, such as potatoes, turnips, mangels, and carrots. Some of these Dad sold by the ton, and what was left was stored in a root cellar to be fed out to cows, pigs, horses, and when we had sheep they got some too. Dad Oelrich, everyone called him Al. He acquired our home in about 1892, whether either bought it or traded a couple of saddle horses for it to Bill Allison. Dad fell from a load of wheat bundles at age 77 and broke his neck in 1941. He traveled across the United States in his youth and often told us tales which I have forgotten. He willed the ranch to Mother, whose name was Sarah Oelrich. She had it for a few years, then Brother Dick Oelrich got it through DVA. As there was a big debt against the ranch, the DVA paid the debt and gave her some cash besides. This was after World War II. Through the DVA, Department of Veterans Land Affairs, Dick sold the ranch to Hugh Anderson. The ranch was just under 8 miles from Princeton. The first road from the ranch to town was built by Dad and his brother Fred and went up over the hills above the ranch, meandering through a lot of trees over a corduroy bridge, past a large swamp, then down a grade along the top of the hill above where it is now, and came down into the valley at the lower end of John Huey's place. It was barely 2 wheel tracks and finally became a trail. We used to enjoy riding through that way to the open range.